We always imagined that first contact would come with questions. Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you want? But when they finally arrived, they asked nothing. The sky changed before any ship was seen. It didn't darken like a storm, nor glow like a spectacle. It became neutral. A tone impossible to define, as if light itself had been recalibrated. Satellites stopped transmitting reliable images. Scientific instruments began to disagree with one another. It was as if the entire planet had been placed under a new ruler. And then, the message appeared. It did not come through radio. It did not come through screens. It came directly to everything capable of seeing. In the sky above, entire continent symbols formed. They were not human words, yet everyone understood them. Not because they were translated, but because the intent pierced straight through meaning. It was impossible to look and not comprehend. The dominant species of this planet will be evaluated. There was no immediate panic. Panic needs time to be born. What came first was silence. A heavy, global silence, as if billions of people had held their breath at the same time. Governments tried to react. Emergency statements were drafted. Defense protocols were activated. But everything felt delayed, childish, irrelevant. There was no visible enemy to aim weapons at, no fleet on the horizon, only presence. I was inside a civilian analysis center, part of an international consortium created to monitor extreme events. My job had always been to translate chaos into comprehensible reports. That day, I realized something disturbing. There was no chaos to translate. There was too much order. Hours after the first message, the second arrived. The judgment has already begun. That was when we understood they had not come to negotiate. They had not come to explore. They had come to observe something that had been underway for a very long time. The evaluation did not begin on the day of contact. It had been happening for centuries. Improvised screens appeared in cities, not installed by human hands, but projected into the air, as if space itself had been converted into a surface. On them, images began to unfold. Wars. Not only the great ones recorded in books, but the small, forgotten ones. Local conflicts. Unnamed massacres. Peoples erased without historical record. Each image came with data. Duration, number of dead, justification presented, benefit obtained. The justification was almost always the same: security, faith, progress, defense. The aliens, if that word still applied, did not narrate. They did not accuse. They simply displayed, like a mirror that does not care whether you like the reflection. Next came the images of inequality. Luminous cities seen from above, contrasted with dark zones where millions lived without access to the basic necessities. Floating graphs accompanied the visuals, showing the absurd concentration of resources in the hands of a few. The word efficiency appeared repeatedly, linked to systems that produced abundance for a minority. The impact did not come from novelty. All of this was already known. The shock came from the coldness with which it was presented, as if human morality had been disassembled into parts and laid out on a laboratory table. Then something changed. The images shifted from events to decisions. A leader signing an order, an executive approving a cut, a general authorizing an attack, a scientist ignoring a warning. Each decision was followed by alternative projections. What would have happened if another choice had been made? How many lives would have been preserved? How much suffering could have been avoided? The branching lines of what if multiplied before our eyes. That was when I realized the true horror. They were not judging humanity for what we did wrong out of ignorance. They were judging us for what we did, knowing exactly what we were doing. The third message arrived at the end of the first day. Short, direct, irrefutable. The human species demonstrates high cognitive capacity, demonstrates high adaptability, demonstrates low collective responsibility. When I read those words, I felt something that no war, no crisis, no environmental catastrophe had ever provoked in me. Not fear, shame, because for the first time humanity was being observed, not as the protagonist of its own story, but as an object of analysis by something that did not need us to exist, and the judgment had only just begun. The world did not fall into panic immediately. It tried to pretend it was still in control. In the first hours after the messages appeared in the sky, presidents, prime ministers, generals, and security councils went on air through improvised broadcasts. Tired faces, rehearsed speeches, words like calm, investigation, protocol, sovereignty. It was almost touching to watch humanity trying to preserve its performance of power in front of something that clearly did not need to acknowledge it. The stock markets did not crash that day. They froze. Financial systems, incapable of pricing absolute uncertainty, simply stopped. Algorithms entered endless loops. Transactions were suspended. Digital fortunes became static numbers on screens no one trusted anymore. For the first time in centuries, money lost its meaning, not through economic collapse, but through irrelevance. Global military forces were placed on maximum alert, submarines repositioned, missiles were armed, satellites attempted to track any physical signal from the entities in the sky. Nothing worked. There was no reliable thermal signature, no detectable mass, no consistent frequency. It was like declaring war on an idea. Then came the alien response to our attempt at organization. No threat, no warning. No spectacle. All projected screens changed at the same time. The leaders who had just spoken appeared on them, not live, but as records, past decisions, orders signed behind closed doors, private conversations, hidden agreements, diplomatic betrayals, strategies that sacrificed entire populations in the name of political stability. Nothing was edited. Nothing was explained. Exposure alone was enough. Ministers broke down in tears in front of their own images. Generals cut broadcasts abruptly. Entire governments lost legitimacy in minutes, not because they were overthrown by weapons, but because they were stripped bare in front of everyone. The following messages made the pattern clear. Human authorities demonstrate recurrent prioritization of self-preservation, governance based on constant internal conflict, low collective efficiency. That was when social trust began to collapse. Entire populations realized something deeply unsettling. If those entities knew so much, if they could see that deeply, then there were no backstage rooms left, no secrets, no illusion that someone, somewhere, truly controlled the situation. Protests erupted, not against the aliens, but against human governments. Capitals were overtaken by confused crowds, not driven by organized rage, but by diffuse desperation. People demanded answers from leaders who no longer had any, and the aliens observed. Then came the fourth message, perhaps the most disturbing so far. Armed resistance attempts have been simulated. Results: accelerated extinction. The screens displayed projections, not as a threat but as calculation. Scenarios of human attack, alien retaliation, estimated times, survival percentages. In every simulation, the same conclusion appeared. Any attempt at confrontation drastically reduced the probability of species preservation. It was not intimidation. It was statistics. The psychological effect was devastating. Humanity realized it was not facing an enemy to defeat, but an evaluator that had already calculated every possible alternative. War, our favorite language, simply did not apply. And then amid this silent collapse came the sentence that changed everything. The evaluation does not seek punishment. It seeks selection. No one understood immediately what that meant, but everyone felt its weight, because selection implies choice. And choice implies discard. That day the world did not end, but the idea that all of us mattered equally died, and for the first time it was not a human who decided that. The sixth day marked a moment when humanity realized it was not being attacked, it was being corrected. The first removal happened in broad daylight. On a congested avenue, an armed man was trying to force his way into a supermarket. He shouted, threatened, shoved people aside. Nothing different from what had already become common since the collapse of human authority, until he simply stopped. His body went still for a second. He didn't fall. He wasn't struck. He simply lost rigidity, as if he had been shut down from the inside out. Then he dissolved into light particles, silent, almost beautiful. There was no blood. There was no impact. The people around him screamed, not because of what they saw, but because of what they understood. Minutes later, every available screen lit up with the same message: behavior classified as hostile, individual removed from the social system. It was not an execution, it was an exclusion. The pattern repeated across different parts of the world: violent looting, summary executions, sexual assaults, torture. Whenever the invisible threshold was crossed, the response came, fast, precise, without emotion, and always public. The next message made it clear that this was not moral punishment, but functional adjustment. Uncontrolled aggression compromises collective viability. Preservation requires immediate correction. Humanity understood, with painful delay, that it was facing a system that did not judge intentions, beliefs, or ideologies. It judged outcomes. It judged social impact. and there was no appeal. The effect was immediate. Open violence began to decline, not because people had become better, but because they had learned to perform better. Kindness became a strategy. Empathy turned into survival behavior. People helped strangers while looking at the sky, at improvised cameras, at anything that might be watching. Fights were interrupted by desperate pleas. Don't do this. They are watching, and they were. The screens lit up again. Cooperation reduces the rate of exclusion. Fear is not cooperation. That sentence was devastating. It made clear that the system was not interested in blind obedience, but in sustainable patterns. It was not enough to pretend to be humane. One had to function as a collective. Communities began to reorganize. Improvised councils emerged. Violent individuals were isolated not for justice, but for self-preservation. "You will kill us all" became a literal accusation. In some places, populations delivered individuals deemed dangerous into open areas, knowing what would happen. In others, they tried to hide them, and paid the price when exclusion occurred anyway. There was no hiding behavior. Then came the most disturbing concept yet. Permanence is not a right, it is a condition. Human society began to reshape itself around this idea. Children were taught to control impulses not through ethics, but survival. Emotions became policed, hatred became too dangerous to express, and slowly, something was lost. It wasn't violence that disappeared first, it was authenticity. People smiled more, helped more, spoke of unity, reconstruction, future. But behind every gesture there was calculation. Behind every decision, fear. The system no longer needed to remove so many individuals. Humanity was learning on its own. And while this happened, the entities observed, adjusted parameters, refined criteria, like scientists watching an organism finally respond. The war had not ended, it had simply changed form. Now, the battlefield was human behavior, and every daily action carried the silent weight of a question no one dared ask out loud. Am I acting correctly, or simply the way they want me to? After human behavior began to be regulated by the fear of exclusion, something changed in a silent and irreversible way. The aliens no longer needed to intervene frequently. The system was already functioning on its own. Humanity had learned to watch itself, correct itself, restrain itself, but that was not enough. Not for them. The next step was announced without ceremony, as if it were nothing more than an inevitable logistical adjustment. Screens across the world displayed the same message. The current population distribution is inefficient. Spatial reorganization optimizes observation and stability. At first, no one understood what it meant, until people began waking up in places different from where they had fallen asleep. Entire families went to sleep in their homes and woke up inside structures they had never seen before. Cities appeared where there had once been desert, unknown buildings, clean, silent, perfectly functional environments. There was no transport, no visible movement, no memory of the journey, only the sensation that space itself had been folded during sleep. Within days, it became clear human communities were being moved across the planet like pieces on a board. Groups considered unstable were relocated together. Regions once violent began coexisting inside controlled spaces. Cooperative populations were grouped into wide, organized, almost comfortable zones. There were no fences, no alien soldiers. Control was not physical, it was structural. People realized they were being compared. Human reactions were observed. Adaptation was measured. Internal conflict was recorded. And above all, there was the disturbing sensation of being watched not as individuals but as patterns. In some areas, massive screens appeared showing images from other zones. People watched communities similar to theirs react in different ways. Some stabilized, others collapsed, others simply vanished from the transmissions, without explanation. No message accompanied these disappearances, none was necessary. What came next was even more disturbing. Gradually, it became clear that the aliens were not merely studying how humanity behaved under control, they were enjoying the variations. Reorganizations became more frequent, more abrupt. One group fell asleep united and woke up divided. Another woke up surrounded by strangers with opposing values, not as punishment, but as stimulus, like adjusting parameters to see what would happen. It was a living experiment, and we were the content. The idea of resistance no longer existed, not because it was impossible to fight, but because there was no one to fight, no targets, no command centers, no constant physical presence. Control came from above, from outside, from a level that did not allow direct confrontation. Humanity, which for millennia believed itself to be at the top of the chain, was reduced to an observable variable. Over time, something even more cruel became evident. The aliens did not hate us. They did not despise us. They did not fear us. They managed us, like a problematic species that needed to be kept functional but not free, like a system that produces interesting results when pressured in the correct way. And the world, reorganized, silent, and watched, began to accept this. People started planning their lives within the imposed limits. Dreams became smaller, ambitions shorter. Comfortable survival replaced any idea of full freedom. Without realizing it, humanity stopped asking why. It began asking only how to continue. And it was at that moment, without explosions, without final battles, without total destruction, that the story reached its true end. Not with the extinction of the species, but with something far more efficient: domestication. The day the Earth stopped was not the day everything ceased to function. It was the day we continued to function, exactly as they wanted.